Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all joining us from all over the world. And I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar, Translating Warnings into Action. This webinar is organized by the Global Disaster Preparedness Center and is supported by the Warning Research Center at the University College London. My name is Vlad Kavalewski. I'm the Knowledge Management Program Manager on the GDPC team, and I'll be your host and moderator for the next hour and a half. And today we're joined by a really exciting panel of speakers and experts who will share their insight with us and discuss how can we improve early warning systems to make sure that they're more inclusive and more effective. We know that early warnings are an important part of disaster preparedness that help prevent loss of life and also mitigate disaster impact. So the challenge is how do we design and implement them in the way that makes them inclusive and ensures that critical information reaches communities and warnings translate into action. So that's what we're going to delve into. This is the challenge and the question that we're going to explore today with our experts. And before we start, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. I want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and then recording will be posted on our platforms and shared afterwards. The chat box is open, so please use it to introduce yourself and also tell us where you're joining from in the world. But please use it responsibly and only keep your comments to the content of our presentations. We will have Q&A and discussion part after all the speakers' presentations. So if you think of question you would like to ask one of our speakers, save it for later, and you have time to ask by unmuting and speaking up, or just through the chat. Then keep your video and audio off, please, during the presentation. It will help to improve bandwidth and make audio clear for other participants, because as we know, people join from all over the world, and internet connectivity is very different in different parts of the world. And then after the event, stay tuned for a follow-up email that would include recording and all other resources from the session. And yeah, that's all in terms of housekeeping. And then let me give you a little bit of background on the event, why we decided to host it. And one of the reasons is that we recently published our new report, Translating Warning into Actions, how we can improve early warning systems to protect community. The report was prepared by the Warning Research Center, and today we're joined by primary author and co-author of the report, and they will talk a little bit about the report itself and key findings later in the session. And then another result of our exciting UCL Warning Research Center is the Warning Briefing Notes series. It's a series of really short briefing notes, literally 2 pages, that discuss different aspects of early warnings. So yeah, if you haven't checked them out yet, I highly encourage you to go to our website, preparecenter.org, and check those resources. They're really informative and really insightful if you're interested to learn more about different aspects of early warnings. And with that, let me welcome our speakers for today. As I said, we have a very diverse and very exciting panel of speakers. Dr. Andrew Tapper, principal of the Natural Hazard Consulting. It's a consultancy that focuses on multi-hazard or early warning projects. He's the lead author of the report, and as I said, he'll share more about the report recommendations and findings. Then we're joined by Dr. Karina Fernley. She is director and founder of the UCL Warning Center, as well as associate professor at the Department of Science and Technology Studies at University College London. And she will talk more about inclusive early warning, what it means for early warnings to be truly inclusive, and discuss different strategies and examples from I4C experience with how to ensure inclusivity in early warnings. Then we have Emmanuel Ntale. He is a manager of climate and environment unit at the Uganda Red Cross Society, and he will share his experience from the field of how Uganda Red Cross works to ensure that those critical messages reach communities and warnings translate into action. And last but not least, we have Jessica Ports-Robert, my colleague and Senior Partnership and Innovation Lead at the GDPC. And Jessica will discuss Common Alerting Protocol, what it is, why it matters, and why it's relevant and really important for effective early warnings. And then, as I said, we'll move into Q&A part where you will be able to ask your questions to all the speakers. And with that, without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Andrew Tupper and with his presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Vlad. Really appreciate the invitation to speak. I'll just take a second to get my sharing happening. Okay. Right, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to speak for 15 minutes or a little bit less, I hope, and make some general points really, and then we'll get the real expertise from the speeches to come. The first point that I want to make that is made in the report is about our role, the role of all of us in warning systems, and it actually comes from a little bit of imposter syndrome that I had when we were working on this report, thinking, oh, you know, what do I have to say? I'm not an academic. I can't say, you know, all the latest and greatest about everything. I'm more of a practitioner. I've worked in sort of operational warnings capacities and warning systems for my career. And then I thought, well, hang on. If I'm feeling like that, I bet a whole lot of other people involved in warning systems also feel like that, because warning systems are really complicated, and it's hard to see everything and it's hard to fix everything when we see problems. So one of the main points I want to make is that wherever we are in the warning system, if we're doing good and useful things, if we're making things better, we're making the whole system better. And we can be forgiving when things go wrong, and we can understand that we can't fix everything ourselves. Now, the diagram that I've got on screen it's a version of the kind of multi-hazard early warning system diagram that we tend to see. There are lots of different variations of this. This particular rendition is to emphasize that underneath this, the sort of categories of warning system activity, risk knowledge, monitoring warning, preparedness and response, warning dissemination that we tend to see, there are foundational layers that are cross-cutting and that help everything to work together well. And, you know, in this rendition of it, it's diversity, governance, relationships, taking a multi-hazard approach, and scaling it locally, regional, and internationally. Of course, you can cut it up many different ways. The sources for this are on the screen to the right. But one of the critical points, I think, is that a warning system is not just a process. It's something that rests on foundations that really speak to the way that we behave, the way that we relate to each other, the way that we govern ourselves. So first couple of key points. We are important no matter what we are and what we're doing in the warning system. And the foundations are as important as the kind of structures that sit on top of them. In the another concept I want to get across too, showing this value chain, value cycle diagram, which comes from work by Brian Golding and adapted by others, and it's being used in a couple of important World Meteorological Organization projects to explore the way we examine the value chain or the value cycle in warning events. One of the nice things about this diagram is it shows these mountains of knowledge, but it shows the potential fragility between the bits of expertise or the actors in a warning system, colloquially referred to as the valleys of death, being bridged by structures. And warning systems do break down. This talk is mostly in the positive, but warning systems do break down when our structures, our ways of connecting the bits of knowledge or the people break down as well. So communication is a really important part of that, not just communication to those affected, but communication and trust between each other, and also the more pragmatic things like standard operating procedures and us teasing out problems in the system. So we'll come back to that one at the end. The report goes through a few examples, and the examples are tending to draw on very well-known kind of events, but really just to tell a little bit of the story of the enormous amount of work that has taken place, particularly over the last century, in terms of building warning systems from the local to the global, and how the actions of individuals and institutions have really helped in that. So one of the examples given, well known here in this community, is the 1970 Bowler cyclone, where at least, but probably many more than 300,000 lives were lost in a situation where it was known that a cyclone was coming ashore, but a series of breakdowns happened in the warning system, and mass casualties resulted, and also that contributed greatly to mass political consequences around the creation of Bangladesh. Since then, the efforts stimulated by that and other events have been happening, so that we're now in a very different position in terms of the local arrangements, where, as noted on screen, there's an enormous amount of work that goes on to keeping people safe in Bangladesh, and the really innovative things that have been done, enormous use of volunteers and so on. But also at the global level, at the science level, that event spurred rapid development of tropical cyclone warning systems. It also prompted a lot more effort to freely share satellite data, for example, so that everyone has got access to satellite data. It's helped to drive the development of meteorological forecasting models. And everyone involved in those improvements has been motivated by events like this. And because they've happened at the global, regional and local levels, the net impact has been enormous. Similar kind of event, older, possibly even more famous in world terms, although not as significant in terms of lives. The 1912 Titanic disaster is well known as being a major stimulus for the development of the Convention on the Safety of Life at Sea, which is known as the Solace Convention. Conventions like that bring a whole lot of countries together. They don't just happen, they take a lot of passionate work. And it might be in the halls in Geneva or Paris or London or wherever, but it's driven by individuals making a difference from wherever they've come from, and sometimes thumping the table really hard to make that happen. And being able to reach international agreements like that can take decades. In the case of SOLAS, it's been steadily improved over the years. But reaching those agreements can make a tremendous difference. On the other hand, it's not enough. It's not enough just to reach an agreement. That's got to be implemented. And I'm sure we're all well aware that at the moment we still have many instances of people who are very vulnerable, who are essentially powerless, losing their lives at sea because they're in situations where the safety of life at sea is not being respected, and their life is not being held as valuable. So the work of implementation of agreements like this never stops, and that happens on the ground as much as, you know, in the big holes and so on. That's something that we should all be aware of as being part of our work. A more recent and again pretty well-known case, which was an outstanding example of people working together, was Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines in 1991. Tens of thousands of people were evacuated in time or self-evacuated. Tens of thousands of lives were saved. It was the major eruption of the 20th century happening during a typhoon, which exacerbated the impact of the eruption due to the weight that got added to the ash and the lahars cascading down the volcano and so on. And those evacuations happened because there was a chain of events where locals, Indigenous people of the area, saw that unusual things were going on, spoke to a local NGO and said, this is not normal, but it does link to our traditional knowledge around this being a potential volcano. And the science community got involved really, really strongly and worked with governments in the Philippines and also in the US to make things happen. And that was what resulted in the evacuations. But as discussed in the report, social science studies done afterwards also showed that even though it was a wonderful success, it wasn't perfect. So even in a great result, still lots of people died. And the responses to the warnings were a part of that. And so there were lessons to learn to go back through. And also, if we're talking about volcanoes, the success at Pinatubo doesn't mean automatic success elsewhere, because there is actually no consistent global volcanic warning system. The arrangements aren't really in place to make sure that all volcanoes are monitored. That last year's Tongan eruption was from an unmonitored volcano, for example. And although only a few lives were lost, I don't like saying that, only a few lives, it could have been much, much worse, and there are things still to fix up there. So just moving on, another example, more recent again, Hurricane Sandy in the US, many lives lost and many lessons learned. But I just wanted to draw out one thing, which was that it taught us profound. It was one of the first events to occur after the rise of social media that really got everyone's attention, and it showed us social media could be a really positive thing, but also there was a potential for people being left behind because not everyone's on social media. There was also a wonderful example of a personal plea amongst all this sort of structured warning systems and press conferences and so on. Great example of Gary Swakarski, who was a local leader in the National Weather Service, took the unusual step of putting his own phone number onto an official briefing and using some highly emotional language to get some cut-through messaging through. And I applaud that, because I think the personal trust and personal connections within a major event are still really important for making a difference to individuals. And when you see an official who is willing to put their job on the line, as he was, to really go the extra distance, then that impacts people. So our actions are important during events. So this is my last slide, and a few general points before we get to the richness of the talks to follow. I talked about relationships before. Well, firstly, we are lagging behind the Sendai commitments, the commitments that all of our countries have made to improve multi-hazard early warning systems. And And so we need to work out how to accelerate that. So as I was saying before, relationships are important. Everything is better if relationships are good. Projects fail all the time. Capacity building projects, warnings projects, warning issuance and so on. They are all made better if we work really hard on respectful relationships, no matter what our role in the system is. Community empowerment is essential. We'll hear more about this from other speakers, so I won't dwell on that. There are all kinds of warning systems in the world. We need to ensure that we take a multi-hazard approach to make our warning systems as simple and relevant as possible. And there's going to be some hard work to be done to make that happen across borders and across different hazards. Science and technology continue to be very important to give us earlier warnings. There are some parts in the world where there are almost no weather observations being taken. There's an initiative at the moment, the Systematic Observations Financing Facility, that's trying to deal with that. And that will help, but there are many other things that need to happen. I've referred to the volcano arrangements earlier. Similar things could be said about seismic monitoring and so on. And there are many great measures that can be implemented, like the Common Alerting Protocol. All that sciencey, techie stuff really helps on the ground. It doesn't do everything, of course, but it's necessary to help empower people as much as possible. We need to know a lot more about risk. I think we'll hear about that a bit later too, and about impacts and the way that we communicate our forecasts and warnings. So my last point on the slide, just returning to the first point, is warning systems are really complex. The work is never ending, and it can be sometimes feel a bit disempowering because things go wrong. But whatever we are doing in a warning system, whatever our confidence in ourselves, the work that we do, if we do it respectfully, if we're working with each other, we will be making a difference. And the developments over the last century and more really show that early warning systems can save lives, protect property, and make the world a much better place. So I want to encourage everyone to keep at it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tupper, for your excellent presentation and for being perfectly on time. And with that, as I said, if you have questions, save them for later. We'll have Q&A part after all the presentations. And with that, I'd like to move on to Dr. Karina Fernley, and she'll talk about inclusivity in early warning, what it means, and what are some of the elements that can help us achieve the inclusivity.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for inviting me to present today and for organising this wonderful event to celebrate the launch of the report that Andrew and our team wrote together. And I want to build on what Andrew has talked about by looking at how can we enhance inclusivity in warnings. And I'm going to take you through 5 key elements that are used to generate inclusive actions for both early warning systems and communities. So first of all, I just want to ask, what is inclusivity in warning systems? Well, it means basically involving everyone in warning systems. And that includes, whatever sex, gender, sexuality, age, race, ethnicity, caste, disability that you might have. And that could be physical, mental, cognitive. But it also means looking at inclusivity in terms of religion, languages, communication forms, or cultural identities, and also precarity. So thinking about those that are detained, undocumented, homeless, or in asylum status. So this really includes everyone, and it's something that is every single nation around the world needs to think about inclusivity. And the idea is that we really need to make sure that our warnings are tailored to specific requirements or needs, so that we can make sure that they are actually having the people's needs are being met and they can be safe. But of course, quite often we're not just dealing with one element of a characteristic, a single characteristic. we often have multiple characteristics. You may be a Christian in a wheelchair with an elderly person, for example. And so it's like thinking about all of those things together, and that's being called intersectional. So it's intersectional, where we have lots of cross-cutting issues, and that makes it quite complex in terms of thinking about what warnings are going to require people to do, and are they going to be able to do that, and are there limitations if they've got many different characteristics in place. So inclusivity in warnings really matters because we've got the Sendai framework, Target G, that's looking at making sure that we increase availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems. We then also have the Early Warning for All initiative, launched last year by Antonio Guterres, to ensure everyone on the planet is covered by an early warning. And so as we start to see coverages of warnings expanding, as we see more warning systems being developed, what is really important is we make sure that inclusivity is a core and critical part of that, to get to be able to communicate with those who are marginalised or require specific messages. And often we think about abilities that can be represented by a single icon. So here we have, disability is often reflected as a wheelchair or someone who can't walk, a very visible thing. But we have to really think out of the box here in terms of our inclusivity and what kind of abilities people have. And there's a lovely quote here by Mara Parker Follett, who says that unity, not uniformity, must be our aim. We attain unity only through variety, and differences must be integrated, not annihilated or not absorbed. So it's really important that we bring these differences together, and I think that really beautifully captures the essence of this talk. So I want to take you through like 4 key elements that are really important in terms of creating that integration. The first one is focusing on the first element of the early warning systems, which Andrew just showed you before in the circle, on disaster risk knowledge. And it's really important that we integrate from the first mile. So this is where we are including civil society groups, local leaders, the people who are affected by a hazard, the user group essentially. And they shouldn't be the last mile. They shouldn't be the people that just get the message at the end. They should be integrated right at the start of the process, using participatory approaches. And this means understanding where people are coming from, having them involved in the design of the system, so you can bring that local, national, or even regional level together, establish multi-way communication, and also make sure you are having good community actions to prepare for events, and that will also help build trust in terms of when the warning actually comes. If it is coming from, say, a meteorological organisation, that there is trust and there's a willingness to believe, act, and respond to that warning, which is really important. It's often the part of warnings that we forget about but are the most important. We also want to make sure that we are supporting accessible data communication and engagement opportunities. And having accessible data on some people and in some countries is very, very challenging. There's a lot of challenges involved in how we can get that data, how we can keep it secure, and whether people are willing to give that data. They may be very concerned about where that data is going and put their life at risk. So there's lots of really important things that we need to think about in terms of engaging with the community and understanding the end user. And of course, the Red Cross have done a wonderful job with this in terms of the community early warning systems guiding principles that outline these elements. Another really interesting project that you might be aware of is developing risk awareness through joint action, the Daruja project, which again works across Kenya and specifically in Kenya, but also in urban areas where in Kenya and Tanzania, people often do not get a weather forecast. They have to just look at the sky and try and figure out what's going on. So this has been a project that's been very much focused on this idea of the first mile, working with the local communities, building them into the design stage and the communication, and bringing that top-down, bottom-up approach in a very integrated way. And it's a very successful project that's now being increasingly rolled out across many of the nations in Africa. The second key thing is observations, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting. Well, what we need to do is build capacity for development and outreach. And what that means is we want to have buy-in from local communities so that we can have them provide information, whether that's in terms of citizen science, as you can see from this article here, which talks about the extreme citizen science project that was taking place at UCL, for example, where we get people to actually be the scientists, provide the data, the eyes and the ears on the ground. But it also helps foster commitment and collaboration. We also want to make sure that we're including women and other people with disabilities at the negotiation tables, so we can help make sure that our responses to information are gender sensitive and adjust for disability requirements. As part of this, we also want to make sure we develop robust methodologies and guidelines to enhance inclusivity of early warning systems. This provides some accountability and also some trust and clarity about the different roles of what people are doing. But we also want to make sure we conduct capacity development. So that means training, outreach, awareness exercises that are tailored to the intended audience. So really the key issue is diversity, collaboration, and commitment. And a really good example of this is the Fiji Women's Weather Watch, which started off by women feeling very much like they were included from cyclones that happened and storms that happened in 2004 and 2007. And so they were basically given the opportunity to be involved working with a community radio and sending text messages across to other women, other communities. And they found that this was incredibly successful, that they now provide a multi-directional communication tool, providing information for a wide range of vulnerable or children, women and children groups, many in remote areas, that address the specific needs of those communities. But they're also now tracking how are people responding to it. They're looking at how people are faring after a crisis, what could have been done better, and getting people's lived experiences. So it's grown beyond that project. The third key element is warning dissemination and communication. And so this is about expanding inclusivity and raising awareness. So when we disseminate a warning, we want to make sure that we are making sure that it is redundant in our messages. So we're hearing a lot right now about the importance of technology and the role that technology has to play in terms of cell broadcasting and so on. But of course, whilst that works for some people, for many people that's not going to work. And also we have to assume that technology fails, because it often does in a crisis. So we need to have that redundancy in our warning systems. Need to be communicated across various platforms, whether it's through the Common Alert Protocol, whether it's cell broadcasting, whether it's TV, radio, text message, community leaders, church services, whatever that may be. It's really important that it's over various platforms. And as part of that, it means engaging with local leaders, the local rabbi, the local imam, the tribal leader, and integrating that local culture and language into that warning process. So it really helps strengthen that local and national resilience. We can use technology to help translate messages. We can use technology to help people who are deaf receive warnings, people who are blind to receive warnings and understand what they need to do. And that's where technology can be really useful. And of course, what we need to do ultimately is understand the communication needs of our vulnerable groups. And that requires ongoing surveys, focus groups, to help build appropriate communication dissemination tools, messages, channels, and messengers. And of course, this, as I said, needs to be something that is a continuing process, because our society changes over time. Technologies come and go, different elements of culture shift. So this is really important. So key is the communication, redundancy, adaptability, and creativity. And a really good example, I just wanted to show you a very quick clip of here, is this idea of thinking about out the box. So we've got the Get Ready, which was based on the back of the climate change IPCC report in 2002, which was talking about, what we can expect in terms of our future weather given the current climate. And this video, which I'm sure many of you have seen, and I will just play like a few seconds just to get a gist of it, is about taking the idea of celebrating that this is happening. Well, I wouldn't say celebrating, but looking towards how can we make this a positive, what things can we do to help the situation, and doing that in the form of dance and creating a song that just creates a different type of engagement. So just take a listen to this for a second.
Hey everybody, climate science reports just come out. It's really important, because we know the facts can be scary and boring. Instead, we thought we'd teach it to you through the medium of dance fitness. Up now, ready, set. With our guitar, wave your arms. You can sing. All we have to do is this song.
So there you can see just the sample of like doing something a little bit different. So finally, the fourth element of the sort of early warning system for part structure that we use from the UN DRR is on preparedness and response capacity. And this is about building local and national systems. So this is really about understanding both the individual and the collective risk and responding to it in a way that is successful and maintainable. This means involving the entire community and understanding what do they mean by risk, or how do they identify risk, and what is the best way of managing that risk. And that means making it inclusive and providing a sense of those different needs and integrating those for those vulnerable and risk people at risk there. Part of this is also running drills and setting up training exercises so that people can actually be really prepared and know how they're going to respond, identify problems that may emerge, and have run through the process once before and be really familiar with it. And then also supporting that collaboration with local governments and even national governments. So it's really about integrating that whole level of support. You know, sometimes you get a crisis that really is very severe, it needs that national response, and it's important that that is able to happen very quickly. So Andrew was talking about Bangladesh, and of course Bangladesh is a wonderful example of where a Red Cross initiative has been incredibly successful with the cyclone system, starting with Bola, the devastation that happened in 1970s, and millions of people that have died. And so now we can see on this picture here, there's numerous women community leaders that have been established to run projects, and there's been all sorts of training going on to develop different types of communication methods to help gather people, spread the message, and get them to the evacuation buildings. And so, you know, this idea of reaching out to many people, the last mile has been reliant on those volunteers, and that's exactly what the Red Cross, the Bangladesh Red Cross, worked on, is building this troop of volunteers, people embedded in with communities that have that responsibility and work to raise awareness. What's really interesting is that we can even go beyond that, and we can say we can build the most amazing and extraordinary you know, shelters, cyclone shelters. So we can see here one designed by Urbana in 2018 in Bangladesh, and this actually serves as a primary school and a health clinic during normal conditions. And it's designed so that it's light, it's airy, there's a ramp so that people with walking physical disabilities are able to access it. It's got great ventilation. And so we can actually use architecture to really enhance communities whilst also providing safety. So what I have talked about is basically summarised in a report that we worked on for the GFDRR World Bank, and these shows you some of the entry points for those 4 different elements. But I think what's really key is coming back to that first diagram that Andrew showed with the 5th element, and this is about integrating those 4 elements. It's about looking at the things that bring the different elements together. So we want to have a people-centred approach. It needs to be integrated between stakeholders and expert engagement in each of the elements. We need to join up the planning, the approaches and decision-making processes across the 4 different elements and build good governments that can really help facilitate good decision-making. So it's this 5th element that's sort of integrating, working across these 4 elements, multiple users, multiple hazards, that is really, really key to the success of an inclusive early warning system. So to summarise, the essential actions really are about engaging diverse communities and stakeholders from the very beginning, integrating and iterating and adaptive learning, which is really important, and supporting initiatives and activities that create an enabling environment. And what evidence has shown is that taking practical approaches to inclusion has better outcomes outcomes. It reaches more groups than just a one-size model. And it's great to see the Red Cross already doing so many of these initiatives. So once again, I just want to thank our host, the Global Disaster Preparedness Center, for enabling us to work with them, producing the briefing notes and this report. Please do check it out and check out our social media. We've got an upcoming event in September on creating early warnings for all. Please take a look. I'll put the link in the chat. Sign up, and we'll be talking about warnings for 3 whole days. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your questions in due course.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karina. And now we're going to move to Uganda, and I would like to invite Emmanuel Ntale from the Uganda Red Cross Society to share his perspective from the field and also some of the lessons learned and experiences on how Uganda Red Cross works to ensure that messages reach vulnerable communities. Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Is my screen on?
Yes, yeah, we see it.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm going to share our experiences from Uganda Red Cross on how we ensure messages are delivered to the communities. To bring some bit of background, we started working with the forecasts and warnings largely since 2013, where we started on pilot projects on anticipatory action. And since then, we've been really largely working with the forecast information and our warnings from the communities to inform specific actions. And in 2018, we started large-scale projects funded through the Netherlands Red Cross with the national-wide engagements, and also largely building on the lessons we learned from the initial pilots of 2013 when we are developing anticipatory action frameworks. And in 2020, we had our action protocols approved based on impact-based forecasting. And 2020 to now, we've been largely working on scaling up some of these interventions and also decentralizing in the sense of going to the communities under different projects at the Uganda Red Cross. And from this, we've been largely working and taking this forecast and weather information rather serious, because we use it to inform actions at the community level. And last year, we had a session, a national dialogue, where we had different stakeholders. Part of the discussions were involved in early warning and early action in country. To bring perspective on the early warning information ecosystem in Uganda, it's rather a complex structure. We have information coming from different sources. We have different mandates of institutions that serve both government and also a Red Cross that works auxiliary to the government. The picture we see, the graphic up, shows an information ecosystem of early warning in Uganda. We have national data providers, the Uganda National Met Authority, the Directorate of Water Resource Management under a different ministry. That's the Ministry for Water and Environment. And largely that information is shared through either email, website, and different now organizations, media houses, Red Cross, and different stakeholders who are interested in making sure this information goes to the community, access that information through that channel. And it's rather a complex structure from the providers of that information, how it goes to the last mile. These are the target communities. We see on the left a structure of our national emergency coordination and operations structure in Uganda. The Red Cross sits on the National Emergency Coordination Center. We call it the NECOCO in Uganda. And we also bridge the gap from the national actors and the district actors. to the communities. At the district, we are part of the district disaster management committees. So when we get this information across these different fora, the question is, how do we ensure that this communication reaches these communities in a timely manner? We have developed alerts. We have developed flowcharts that regulate the flow of disinformation internally at Uganda Red Cross for information that aims to activate anticipatory action or information that originates from national sources. Once it's received at Red Cross, we have the early warning focal point, who sends it through the structure to the branches, volunteers, and the communities. That's for information that is originating from the national level. And for information or alerts that originate from the community level, there is also a different structure on how that flows from the community to up to the headquarters. But what I can mention is, yes, those are structures, but in practice, there have also been many efforts to ensure that this information reaches the communities timely. Now that is both for alerts and also information that is largely weather and climate information. And some of the approaches that we use and has been rather effective are the door-to-door engagements, because you find some of these communities are off the grid. They don't have like electricity. Even a mobile network is rather complex to be in some of these vulnerable communities. The actual last mile who needed this information. And we use IEC as well, specific posters and advisories that the volunteers use to do outreaches to these communities. And social media like WhatsApp has also been rather useful. We have different WhatsApp platforms in specific hotspot communities that we know are largely prone for these disasters that we largely face in Uganda. And of lately, we've also scaled up the issues of community radio because from what we've seen and experiences working with forecast information, there is an issue of lead times. Sometimes you do not have all the time to follow through the structures for this information to get to the last mile who needs to make a decision. So community radios have rather been effective in in passing on information at the communities with the short lead times, and also could easily be sustained by the communities. What we see, we're installing community radio in one of the communities in Western Uganda. Largely, the lessons we've learned from these engagements. The first one I want to highlight is the flow and origin of disinformation is not linear. Despite having the predefined protocols and procedures, what we've seen is disinformation comes from whichever direction, and it needs to get to the last mile person to make decisions rather quickly. So whichever means available is what we employ to ensure that this information becomes timely to inform decision. Because what we've learned largely, it could simply be too late where you have information and it cannot inform meaningful actions at the community level. And a second critical lesson is technology and digital tools have increasingly made information flow more effective. We have seen through these different platforms like WhatsApp and other social media platforms, this information can easily be relayed to the target communities rather effectively. And feedback is also acquired through the same channels. Now this for communities that have access to these technological means, which is not uniform across all the different communities that need this information. And a third critical lesson is, well, there is one bit of making sure this information reaches the last mile. but also what we've learned largely, taking action based on that information depends on the trust with which these decision makers, or largely the communities, have in the information. And I highlight this is not exactly the same as the skill or the reliability of that forecast. What that means is what we've learned, even if you really invested so much to make sure that you have rather accurate and reliable forecast information or warning information from whichever source, what influences these communities to take action based on this information is rather the trust they have in the person who is disseminating this information, and this is not the same as the skill or how accurate that information is. The fourth lesson is translating from warning to action successfully. Yes, we need more than technical solution of forecasting and making sure we have accurate information, but rather also invest in the mindset change for the communities who are the recipient and use this information to inform action. We've seen from many communities that we've engaged in that, well, some, even if they received information, they will rather wait for what they have observed to take action. These are DRR action. And this is a mindset because in different communities, people have perceptions around disinformation. Number 5 is still reliability of information is crucial to build confidence in the communities because some of what are the barriers of hindering taking action based on information rather lies on previously we've had some examples in communities where they say, well, we shall not take that information serious because sometime we received information of start of a planting season, we planted our seeds and then it didn't materialize. And for us who work with that information, we know it's a probability. If it's, for example, forecast information, even if it's at 80%, there is still a percentage of it not happening. And so it's rather important for consistency of disseminating if there are any changes in that information to the communities, and also still making sure that there is some bit of reliability in that information that we send to the communities. And lastly, there is still a mutual distrust between the producers of scientific information and the local observations, which could be indigenous knowledge for this case. In some communities where we've been, you find that communities will rather use part of what they have observed based on their traditional beliefs and indigenous indicator to make meaningful actions rather than the scientific information. And it's the other way around when we engage with the forecasters and these other sources, scientific sources of disinformation. They will ask scientific question on some of the gaps in the indigenous knowledge. And what we've done, and that's been rather useful, is to create a middle ground where we merge both information that is coming from community observations and also scientific information, not necessarily because we believe in it or because of accuracy and precision of this information, but to build the trust and ensure that these communities take this information to inform the different actions. And I would like to end there. Over to you, Val.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. I see in the chat that your main point, main takeaway that trust is key resonated with a lot of people on the call. So we can discuss this more after our last presenter of today is Dr. Jessica Ports-Roberts, my colleague at the GDPC, who will talk a little bit about Common Alerting Protocol and explain why consistency in warnings matters for them to be effective and translate into actions. Jessica, it's the floor is yours.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. So thanks again, everyone. This is a really, really fruitful discussion so far, or presentation so far, and I look forward to some of our discussions after this last presentation of the morning or the afternoon or the evening. So I'm going to touch on some of the themes that we've been hearing from our other presenters, talking about the importance of a multi-hazard approach, talking about the importance of not only relying on, but helping to establish trust, and the importance of inclusion. So things that we've been hearing from some of the other presenters, I'm going to touch on as we talk about the Common Alerting Protocol. So I want to stress that the Common Alerting Protocol is just one tool that can help to improve the effectiveness and improve the reach of early warning systems. So it's not designed to be a solution that works to fix everything, but it's definitely one tool that can help to improve a lot of the systems that we're seeing and address a lot of the challenges that we're seeing in alerting. So I'm going to start with just taking a step back and looking at some of the challenges that we face when it comes to alerting the population effectively. So consider this scenario, this instance of, say, an impending flash flood. This is something that I'm used to. I live in New Orleans in the United States, which is a city that's in a bowl, and we get flash flood warnings all the time, and which means that I get warnings all the time. But one of the important things in this scenario is that people get the key facts for this emergency so that they know what's going on and they know what to do. They need to know what it is, where it is, how soon it's going to be affecting them, how bad it will be, how sure we are that this is something that's going to happen. So that goes to some of the forecasting conversations that we've been having. And what should they do? So these are really the key things that people need to understand when it comes to an alert. The challenges here, one of the challenges is that as different alerting systems have developed in different cities and different countries, many different government entities have multiple different public alerting systems that have been very specific to individual hazards. So depending on how and when different alerting systems were developed, they might have prioritized a different way of disseminating the information, a different technology mechanism. They might have relied, entirely on sirens for tornado alerts, or entirely by email and websites for earthquakes, for example. So there are a number of different ways that these different systems were developed, and depending on when and how that happened, you're looking at this sort of very, very, very varied landscape of different types of hazards and different ways that the information about those hazards is disseminated to the public. So in one single country, just as an example, this scenario could be true, that earthquakes and tsunami warnings are sent by email, newswire, websites, pagers, and phone calls. The weather alerts might be sent by other mechanisms, including fax, radio, television, SMS, and maybe the fire, security, and transportation systems are linked to the TV, radio, sirens, etc. So you're looking at this sort of what we've been referring to as kind of a patchwork of communications. So depending on, the different cities, regions, countries, you're looking at a lot of different mechanisms for a lot of different hazards, and it's confusing. So this is the problem, right? Is even if these are very effective mechanisms in terms of getting to people, it can still be very confusing, because depending on what the hazard is and depending on what's going on, the people are relying on different media. And what you really want them to be able to do is rely on one or two ways that they know that they're going to be able to receive that information. So it can be dangerous because people might miss out on alerts that they should have gotten. They might get alerts that are not intended for them. They might get confusing messages that are difficult to confirm. And this is a wasteful approach, really, because there are redundancies and inefficiencies and duplication of efforts. So CAP, the Common Alerting Protocol, was developed as a way to address these challenges. So what is CAP? It's designed to be a system that carries these key facts that we talked about. So in the flood scenario, which is just one of the number of different hazards that can utilize CAP. In that scenario, we talked about the need to understand where, when, what, how bad, how certain, and what people are supposed to do, right? So all of those different things can be transmitted through a CAP-enabled alert. So CAP is a standard messaging format. It's designed for all hazards and all media. So it can be about any and all different types of hazards. It's not hazard specific, so it can be utilized for any number of different hazards, including some of the ones that are less common that might not already have a pre-existing alert system. And it can be distributed across all different types of media: television, radio, telephone, fax, the little billboards on the highways, sirens, all sorts of different types of media dissemination mechanisms. And it's designed to be accessible for anyone. So it can be for the public at large, or it can be within individual groups. It can be specifically targeted, which is really great. So the Common Alerting Protocol, as I mentioned, CAP is an international standard. It's a digital format. So what you can think about CAP as sort of being, it's a way of formatting your message that allows it to be disseminated or created and disseminated more effectively. So you can think about CAP as kind of being like a standard form, something where you take all of the information about the hazard that's happening, you put it into a form, and that form is very consistent. It's very, everybody understands how to use this form. So you can use that form and it can be distributed in very consistent ways through all of these different dissemination mechanisms. It's been developed by a group of experts and adopted and promoted by organizations like ITU and WMO and of course the IFRC. And it is actively maintained. It's not something that was sort of created and left on its own. There's a working group of experts under the direction and guidance of OASIS, and I have some links for you a little bit later in the presentation so that you can learn more about these different organizations and how they support CAP. So as we were talking about, there are a lot of different trusted authorities or different authorities who have different responsibilities when it comes to an emergency. So we looked at that patchwork of messaging earlier, right? But in addition to that, we have scientific and technical agencies who are responsible for generating the forecasting information. We have civic authorities who are entrusted with the safety of the population. But in an emergency, there might be overlapping jurisdictions. There might be multiple authorities involved. So think about these different types of scenarios where maybe you have a disease outbreak occurring where there's also a flood, or an earthquake that triggers a tsunami warning, or heavy rainfall that can cause flash floods and landslides. That means that we have these complex emergencies where there are overlapping hazards and information from each one of those different hazards coming from a different place. It's coming from a different authority. So one of the ways that you can ensure that those authorities are delivering harmonized messaging and consistent messaging in a way that's not confusing to the population is by using the Common Alerting Protocol. It really supports this harmonized delivery of messaging, helps to reduce redundancy, and helps to improve consistency in alerting. So how do we do that? And what are the benefits of using CAP? So I showed you this image a little bit before. It's designed to be an all hazards, all hazards and all media standardized format. So CAP creates a common process and a standardized format for creating and issuing alerts, as I said. So it helps to facilitate the processing of those alerts. So it's after the forecasters have already done their job and they have the information about those hazards, but we need to get that information to the population. And it's designed for everyone who's involved in the emergency, but it's really designed to communicate those key facts. So let's look at some of these specific benefits. So CAP is a quicker and easier mechanism to issue alerts. There are ways that you can set up CAP to be automatically triggered by the forecasting systems. So if you have forecasting systems that are coming in and you have, for example, earthquake is a great example. So you have a system that's designed to monitor for earthquakes and you have the scientific and technical community that's doing that monitoring of an earthquake. You can have it set up so that CAP alerts are automatically being triggered by those earthquake events. So it's very fast. It's much easier to issue the alerts. They can sort of be pre-drafted so that the information that's coming from the specific event is combined with pre-drafted information about what people should do and have that be delivered to people very quickly. So you don't have that loss of time in a situation where you really need the alert to go out very, very quickly. So it's quicker and easier to issue alerts. There are a lot of activities like in some of the traditional methods of disseminating alerts, you would be talking about phone calls or sending faxes, maybe sending emails or uploading something to a website. Those things all take time, and some of that might take up too much time, too much valuable time, where what you really need is a much faster and more efficient way of doing it. If you use the CAP standard, you can then have all of those different things be populated more automatically, and those alerts get issued much, much more quickly. In a complex emergency, like we were talking about a few minutes ago, where there might be overlapping hazards, a lot of different types of information have to be assimilated. So CAP can be really useful for shared situational awareness amongst the alerting or amongst the actors in those situations. So it's not even necessarily just beneficial for the public who's receiving the information, but also a shared situational awareness amongst all of the authorities that are trying to act in a particular area when it comes to overlapping and complex emergencies. It allows for alerting areas to be more precise. So while something like distributing information on the television or the radio might end up reaching a lot of people who don't actually need that message, which leads to confusion, which leads to lack of trust, which leads to alerting fatigue. CAP CAP allows for specifically geographically targeted messaging with the use of polygons. So they draw, instead of having sort of a wide broadcast, within the CAP alert, you can draw a polygon around the specific area where you want that alert to be distributed, and allows you to be more precise about the alerting area so that only the people who need that information are receiving that information. It also allows for better inclusion and accessibility. So this is something that Karina was talking about earlier, is the importance of inclusion. One of the things that's possible with these sort of digitally automated or digital alerts is it allows for connections with things like text to speech to allow for literacy or visual impairment. It allows for a lot of different ways to include populations that might not have access to traditional alerting mechanisms. And as I briefly mentioned with the earthquake example, it enables better alerting for sudden onset events. So These are just, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this one because I know that I want to make sure that we have time for discussion. But this is the content of a CAP message. It talks about the key facts that we talked about and gives the message a lot of context. So it allows the individuals receiving the alerts to understand who is determining this information, when was it generated, what are the actions that I'm supposed to take, all of those different pieces of context in addition to the key facts that we talked about earlier. And finally, here are some of the dissemination mechanisms that can absorb CAP, that can read that CAP standard, which gives you an idea of how broadly the information can be distributed across a number of different media. So the traditional media, things like TV and radio, but even things like community sirens, mobile phones, including WhatsApp messages and SMS alerts, and any kind of hazard app that you might have on your phone. And then online systems like social media, Google Public Alerts, and ad overlays. So there are a lot of different dissemination mechanisms that can absorb the CAP standard. Here's some additional resources on CAP. I'll make sure that this is included in the information that's sent to you afterwards. But these are just a few resources that you can access to learn a little bit more about the Common Alerting Protocol. It's complicated, but it's also simple, and it's something that can be really beneficial to help with the effectiveness and efficiency of alerts. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And now I would like to open it up to discussion and your questions. You can either unmute and ask your question by speaking up, or you can just post your question in the chat, and we'll go back and forth to answer as many questions as we can in the remaining time. Anyone wants to go? Yeah, I see someone raised a hand. Go ahead. You can. I think you should be able to unmute and speak up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the great presentations. My question is really focusing on sustainability. From my experiences and from what I've observed on the ground, early warning systems, they generally tend to be very functional as long as the development partner is still on site and they are working with the communities, with other local organizations in the area. What is the Red Cross doing in order to ensure that all these investments that it is bringing in are sustainable? Over to you.
Emmanuel, do you want to take this question and talk specifically about Uganda Red Cross?
Yes. I would highlight some critical steps that we are doing to ensure sustainability. I think what you're mentioning is rather critical, and we've also observed it with experiences working with early warning systems. So what we do, we link the systems with the district structures. The list structure within our administration is the district, and these districts have what we call contingency plans. So in the development and management of these different systems, we ensure that they are linked to those structures. So when they are developing their district budgets, they incorporate the budgets for maintenance of these systems. But also the other aspect is we ensure that the district and local communities are part of the processes of installation. They understand the different components, and we so much emphasize very simplistic systems where equipment and the different pieces of those equipments can be sourced locally.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And I hope this answers your question, and I saw that Mandira was the second one to raise your hand. So go ahead, Mandira, to ask your question.
Well, I think this is a very interesting discussion that we are having, and an important topic. Actually, the UNSCAP Asia Pacific regional kind of a resilience week, a disaster resilience week is happening right now. And these are some of the important topics that are being addressed in terms of early warning for all. So I think one of the most important things when we're talking about reaching the last mile is this communication continuum, basically what we are talking about in terms of having the information first available, and then it should be accessible, then it should be also understandable, and then actionable. So that's the whole thing, that's like what is being said right now. So the most important challenge from what I see would be to actually making it actionable, where Emmanuel talked about the examples where you really need to change the mindset of the people and the community. So what are some of the examples that you may want to share to us where you have been successful in changing those mindsets? And I know it's very difficult with the communities. So Andrew, it's very nice to see you, by the way. Thank you. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I don't know who from our presenters would like to take this one, or you can just, all of you can chip in, but feel free to contribute.
Can I start with maybe a simple example in terms of actionable things? I think one of the key concepts that sometimes I worked for the government for nearly 30 years, so I'm probably most familiar with that mindset of thinking what is best for people without turning that around to think about how do I help the people be empowered and make their decisions without government trying to tell them what to do. A really simple example in Australia was that there was quite a long debate about weather radar data and whether to make it freely available, because radar data is flawed. It comes with all kinds of issues. But when that happened, we found that when the data was in people's hands, and of course now you can get it on the app and so on, suddenly people were making really good decisions because they owned the data and they trusted the source. And that meant that the actions taken were their actions, their choices. Now that's a bit simplistic in the case of a mass event where you really want everyone to be doing the same thing. But I think the more that you give people agency and trusting that you're a partner with them rather than the government on high, that really helps. I'll let someone else answer.
Thank you, Andrew. Karina, Emmanuel, Jessica, would you like to add something else?
Yes. Hello?
Go
Yes?
ahead, Emmanuel. Yeah, go ahead.
Emmanuel, I think the example I can highlight where we've tried to change mindset has been largely on the uptake of seasonal forecasts. In Uganda, we have 2 planting seasons, one for March, April, May, and the second season for September, October, November, and December. And most of our livelihoods, the country is 85% dependent on agriculture. So most of the livelihoods are largely based on those seasons. And what we saw engaging different communities, they were not taking this information despite it being produced by the Met Office. Still communities did not base their planting season or did not attribute the start of the season based on that information, but would rather hold on and wait to see what they would observe, or they look at the colleagues starting to plant. And the effort that we've done really has largely been routine and continuous engagement with these communities. Like every every time every time we have this forecast, we engage these communities, we disseminate this information. Mid-season, when we have a monthly forecast, we still go to these different communities. And if there are also any changes in the forecast, we make sure that information also goes to the communities. Because from experience, where we've seen one of the largest gap has been you receive information from the forecast at the start of the season, you disseminate that information to the communities. And when there are any changes mid-season, you don't do efforts to go back to these communities to communicate some of these changes. So with the sustained engagement, we've seen many communities now starting to make their planting decisions based on some of this information from the Met.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for contributing. I see that in the chat there were a couple of questions about CAP. Jess, do you want to take those ones? The second one was how CAP can be used in a local context. How is it used, basically?
Sure. I'm trying to also answer things in the chat just in case we don't get to them in the discussion. But essentially, CAP is designed to be able to be used by any alerting authority. Typically, the place that starts is with a national alerting authority, so something like a meteorological agency or a civil authority of some kind. But it can also be used by any local authority. So it can be used by police or fire departments or any sort of civil defense, local civil defense agencies, and can be used to alert for local events, things like road closures or power outages or other things that are sort of hyper-local events that might not necessarily be on the radar of a national alerting authority. So, and the way that it can be used is the same as the way that it can be used by a national authority. So the alerting authority can generate a CAP alert, and there are a number of different pieces of software and platforms where that can be used to create this CAP alert, and they fill out the form. Once they fill out the form, it goes to a feed. That feed can then be picked up by any one of these different dissemination mechanisms that I talked about earlier. So the feed can be picked up by television, by radio, it can send automatic SMS alerts. It depends on how it's been configured, but it has the capability to be hyperlocal as well as nationally effective.
Thanks, Jessica. I see. I would like to invite our presenters to, there is quite a few questions in the chat, so if you can respond to them in writing, this would be excellent. And also I would like to all of you, I saw that Caroline posted a question about what are we doing right now to communicate El Nino warnings. So if all the participants, I would encourage all the participants to share their experiences and how we're working on this right now. And I saw that Andrea has had her hand raised for some time. So go ahead, Andrea, ask your question.
Hi, everyone. Just to let you know, I'm doing an internship with the Jamaica Red Cross. My question is about CAP. Has it already been utilized in any real life hazard situation? And if so, for that particular hazard, anyone that you might name, what was the difference in the turnaround time using the CAP tool versus what used to happen with the, let us say, patchwork mechanisms before? Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So yes, CAP is being used in more than I think 2/3 of the countries in the world have some sort of CAP enabled mechanism. It's not ubiquitous. It's not like every single alerting agency in every single country. But there are, I would say, and I'm sorry I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I can get them for you in just a minute, where more than, like I said, about more than 2/3 of the countries in the world have at least one CAP enabled alerting system. It depends on where you are, but there are a number of examples. I think earthquakes are probably going to be the most impressive in terms of the speed of the alert actually actually reaching people. With a CAP alert, because it's digital and because it can be done sort of automatically triggered, with an earthquake, you can actually get people who are receiving alerts about an earthquake a matter of seconds, which in an earthquake is significant, a matter of 10 seconds or so before they actually feel the effects of the earthquake. So they actually can have a few seconds of warning before the earthquake hits. Most of the time you're thinking about an alert that will come from something that hasn't happened yet. So a flood that's been forecasted, or a hurricane or typhoon that's been forecasted, and you have a lot of lead time. In that case, the time piece isn't quite as significant in terms of, you know, the impact that it has. But for something like an earthquake, you know, having the opportunity to have a few seconds to step off of an elevator, stop a surgical procedure, you know, pull over your car to the side of the road, having a few seconds is really, really important. And that is something that CAP has enabled. I'll share a couple of links with you in the chat that are some examples of how CAP has been used, and as well as a link that will show you which alerting authorities are CAP enabled globally, so that you can see the reach of it.
Thanks, Jess.
Thanks so
Unfortunately,
much, and very relevant to us in Jamaica, especially with respect to earthquakes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea, for your question. Unfortunately, we're almost at time, so we probably won't have time to go through all the questions, but maybe we can take one or two more. Go ahead, Joseph, unmute and ask your question.
All right, thank you. Thanks to all presenters. I have only one question. I would like to understand a bit about the challenges and practical lessons for integrating indigenous knowledge with the scientific knowledge. If Emmanuel can share some experience from Uganda, what are the lessons and challenges to integrate indigenous and scientific knowledge in early warning systems? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Emmanuel, do you want to take this one?
Yep. I'll first I'll share the two approaches that we've used to integrate indigenous knowledge with the scientific information. And one is the participatory scenario planning kind of session, where we get scientific information forecasts, for instance, and when we are downscaling these forecasts and interpreting them with the communities, we also we do it in the same room with the tellers of indigenous information and the communities, and we look for synergies for this information, and we produce a consensus kind of forecast that we disseminate at that granular level. And some of the challenges that we faced using that approach has been largely with the indigenous information. Some scientific questions cannot be answered from the indigenous kind of information. For instance, what you're looking out for in a forecast is the probability or the certainty of some of the occurrence of these events in the forecast, and that you cannot get largely from some of these indigenous indicators that people look out for. And also, the indigenous information sometimes is largely linked in some communities to social beliefs and norms, which some instances is rather hard to make logical conclusions out of it. And that has been a large challenge when we try now to engage with the scientific forecasters, for them when they are producing this kind of information, to make sure they capture some of the traditional indicators. So I think those have been largely the challenges that we faced working with the indigenous information.
Thanks so much, Emmanuel. And unfortunately, with that, we came to an end of our webinar. Thank you so much again. Unfortunately, we weren't able to take all the questions, but I'm really happy to see that this discussion sparked so much interest. And yeah, but we can take it online and we'll share all the resources, and maybe you can reach out to speakers and ask some of your questions. Thank you so much for joining us today and spending this hour and a half with us. Thank you so much to our presenters for their interesting presentations. I hope this was useful. I hope some of the lessons learned and recommendations you can use in your practice when you're working on early warnings or disaster preparedness, disaster risk reduction in general. And yeah, a few action items. Feel like I really encourage you to check out the report and the warning briefing notes. They're available online on preparecenter.org and also on Warning Research Center website. Also, I would encourage you to submit your content and share your knowledge on Prepare Center. It's a knowledge sharing platform that created for you, and we, really encourage submissions from practitioners to share your experiences and lessons learned. And also sign up for our GDPC update to stay up to date with events like that and other news and updates from GDPC. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And as I mentioned, stay on the lookout for the follow-up that would include the recording and also all the resources that we shared during this session. Again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, or have a good night if you are on the opposite side of the world. Again, thank you so much again.